Awesome, awesome. And then we have here Tania Morris. Tania. So, Tania, you were in WED, and also an interior designer for Walt Disney. So, can you tell us, like, how did you get into WED?
I had arrived in America in 1963. I did my training as an interior decorator in London and had some experience. But I made friends with an antique dealer who called me one day. At that point, I'd opened a very small office and was doing some model homes. And she said, "I've heard of a job for you." I said, "Oh, forget it. I've got enough gray hairs." She said, "No, this is with Disney, and it's 1880s, and it's based in New Orleans." She said, "It sounds really up your alley." So I said, "Oh, all right. I've heard of Walt Disney." So that following, I made an appointment for an interview on Wednesday. That Sunday, my husband and I went to Disneyland. We walked down Main Street. We went into one of the areas. We had a hot dog, and I think we walked back down Main Street. And the interview on Wednesday, I could say, honestly, I had been to Disneyland. I was interviewed on Wednesday, and I didn't think I stood any chance at all of being employed, because there were a great many very sophisticated younger people, or young people, with great portfolios and cute little sports cars. I had 4 pieces of paper from places around the world that I had decorated, and that was it. I didn't have any great sketches. So I had a second interview on Thursday with Emile Coury, Bob Brown, and I think John Hench. And then Emile Coury was head of decorations at the studio for the films. But he had also had a hand in some of the design for Disneyland up to that point. I had a call on the Friday and said I had the job, and I remember sitting back in my chair and saying, "McKnight, you're an idiot. What have you got yourself into?" And I started work the following Monday, and for a couple of weeks or so I finished up my work and went into WED 2 or 3 days a week. Bob Brown, who was Walt's son-in-law, husband of Sharon, was my immediate boss, and then John Hench was above that. And Dorothea Redmond, whom I'm sure most of you have heard, absolutely incredible artist. Dorothy and I worked very closely, and I had, before I went to work at WED, I had done architectural renderings. But as soon as I went to WED, and Dorothy and I would be talking, and I'd be describing something to her, as I'm describing it, it's appearing on the paper. I said, "That's the end of my sketches, forget it." And I didn't do any other. And so that's how I happened to go to WED. And at that time, I think there were 29 employees. And then it split up into various other groups. And we were a little house in the corner of Sonora. And may I go back to something about the Haunted Mansion? In my memory, and I think many of you will agree, that one of the wonderful things about Walt as a genius was his timing for various events to happen, so that the public were always kept in suspense. And in my memory, that was the Haunted Mansion. And the various Haunted Mansions were not made because Walt said the time is not right. And that's when the time was right, and he said, "Go ahead." And that's when we got involved with the Haunted Mansion. Now, some of these gentlemen, they were doing it for fun. I was doing it as a job. I got $125 a week. And but it was a most interesting time to be at WED. I worked with Walt Disney, and I actually traveled to New Orleans with Walt Disney, his wife Lily, his brother Roy and his wife Edna, Bob Brown and his wife Sharon Disney. Claude was there, Claude Coates, Herb Ryman, who was there, Bill Evans, who was the wonderful landscape designer for so much of Disneyland and also Walt Disney World. He was there. And I think 1 or 2 others whom I've forgotten. Bill Martin was there. And there is a photograph of myself with Walt in New Orleans, outside, in front of the Gulf Stream, which we were about to board. And as you see, we dressed formally. I mean, No, it's true. I never went to work in pants. We had suits, I had pearls, a handbag and gloves, and that's how we dressed to go to work. I would never have, well, I don't even own a pair now. I don't even own any jeans, but we never dreamt going to work in jeans. We were very formally dressed. And from New Orleans, we went to Florida. It was a hole in the ground. It was called Project X. And Bill Evans had already brought trees from throughout the world, and they were in Florida hardening off so that when the park was built, they would all be acclimatized to the conditions in Florida. From there, we flew to New York for the World Fair. And let me go to Walt. A couple of stories. Do we have time?
Absolutely, go for it.
Thank you. As you see, I was quite young, and only my hairdresser knows how much gray hair I have now. In New Orleans, Walt knew I had not, we'll go back to the plane, because I was young, as you can see, I'm younger, and I was sick on the aircraft. I was so embarrassed, I was so nervous. We tried not to let Walt know, but he found out. So every meal on that trip, when the waiter or waitress would come along and ask for a drink order before lunch or dinner, they would say, "She doesn't get a drink." That was fine, I didn't really mind that much. The last night, Lily turned to him and she said, "Oh, Walt, for goodness sake, let the girl have a drink." And he said, "I will not add to the juvenile delinquency of America. She doesn't get a drink." And I never did. I never got a glass of wine. But in New Orleans, knowing I had not been there, he insisted we have breakfast in the hotel. And many times I would go meet him in the suite they had, and he'd be reading the newspaper with his slippers on, and we would talk about what I had done the day before, because I was going to every antique shop in the Villeray in the Old Town to buy and search out antiques for New Orleans Square and the shops there, and also for the Club 33. And I would report, and I'd show photographs. Sometimes I would bring the items, and we'd discuss it with Bob Brown and Walt. And then we would go for lunch and dinner to a different restaurant, so that he would introduce me to the cuisine of New Orleans. In New York, he insisted that the chauffeur drive a different way, different route every day to World Fair, so that I would see New York. Now those are some of my memories of Walt Disney. His kindness to me. He used to come in the back door at WED, look at the things on my desk, and he'd say, "What are you spending my money on today?" And I'd show him, "I like that," and off he'd wander. And I was very fortunate to help go antique shopping with Lily and Diane. I did the interiors, or helped Diane and Ron when they bought their ranch out in the valley. And then Bob and Sharon, I taught them, and I took Lily and Edna antique shopping, who had a great sense of humor, sweet lady. And it was a very wonderful time. At the same time, when I see people saying, "Well, I did this and I did that," and all these names of these, we did it as a team. And our mantra was to have detail and authenticity. Those were what we lived by and researched.
So, obviously you have a great history with Walt Disney, and you're traveling a lot with him. And you finally got a chance to go back to Disneyland recently and visit the Haunted Mansion.
I did. You know, it's 50 years since I left, since I was in Disney. And the trip to Disneyland 2 weeks ago was quite thrilling. But my goodness, how much has changed. And change is a good thing, and change is, I was saddened to see, just because of my fond memories, that some of the things that I did in the Haunted Mansion had totally changed. I remember buying a lot of junk, good things that went into the attic. There was a children's pram, there was all kinds of antique stuff and lots of cobwebs, and it really looked like an attic. Totally changed. the wallpaper, the purple wallpaper. Now, there's some history there that still has to be discovered. But I remember doing doodles for it. And I remember when I saw it the first time hung in the Haunted Mansion, kind of kind of saying, I did that, and nobody knows. Because nobody did. We didn't put our names on things. The wallpaper's totally changed. If you see the original, it's much more flowing, and instead of cutesy little owls, you have kind of abstract bat ghosts, totally different, but still same color and the same intent. But that's the kind of things that were changed. Much has changed, and it has to. Things wear out. Everybody has their own idea, but hopefully they have kept authenticity and detail and cleanliness as the three things that Walt wanted in that park.
Yeah, absolutely. So, listening to your story, Tania, and I imagine this goes for many people, especially here on this panel, you know, as years continue to go on and you continue to ride on Haunted Mansion, sometimes things change a little bit. Sometimes maybe it tells you a different story than it did before. Do you ever see new things when you go through a Haunted Mansion? Any one of you?
Oh, well, that's simple. Nobody messes with my arm mover. Here's an interesting. Tom has really shown everybody here something a lot of people didn't appreciate. You think normally a project starts, goes, opens, and that's that. We go off to do something else. That Haunted Mansion thing was an idea that just kept percolating and percolating all the time. There's so many people messing with it. And to see all this concrete, all this earth moving and everything, and then late into the job, they adopt my dune buggy, and it turns into a demolition zone. So the change that occurred was before we opened. Think about it. All that work, right? And somebody had a bright ideas to do things really, really neat, and the company had no fear to tear up stuff and do it really, really good.
It looks like in 1964, maybe when the machine shop finished with their work on the World's Fair, rather than laying everybody off, you know, a lot of people were kept with the knowledge that in '65 there was going to be, you know, a lot more things. And it looks like they may have been doing some of the mechanical drawings for some of the things that we see in there today, like the floating candelabra. I found a whole series of drawings, of mechanical drawings for.
Oh, that's right. The machine shop in those days, we knew a lot of things we were going to use and the other stuff that still had to be developed. We didn't want to waste any time as long as we had talented people in our maple shop to be able to do that. In fact, what's also interesting, everybody asked the question, why did the Haunted Mansion get built so soon, but there was no attraction, no ride until many years later? Well, we had a guy that ran the drafting room for the architects over at 800 Sonora, Harvey Gillette, very strong-minded architect. He liked his building after they decided not to make it like a ratty thing like one of the Anderson drawings. Somehow Harvey pushed for, we'll finish my drawings and we'll pour the foundation and we'll build my building and then you can continue on later. That's the answer, how that happened. But one guy liked his building that much, he pushed until he got it.
There we go, that's it right there. That's why that thing's been standing there for so long, well before the ride. That's incredible. And the other thing too I noticed is that I've always felt that the Haunted Mansion really is like the best way of storytelling an attraction. I think it's the best way to really reach somebody. But I think it's storytelling, but I think every person has a different story that they walk away with after they experience it, right?
I've always said that I think the best story in Disneyland is Peter Pan. It has one line to the story. Come on, everybody, here we go. And from that point on, it's you flying through the bedroom and out over London, and you flying off to Neverland, and you writing your own story. I think movies or by their nature, they tell us stories within the movie. But at Disneyland, the best experience is you go home with a story that you created while you wrote it. And I think that Haunted Mansion is one of those rich experiences where, yeah, the guy is talking to you in the doom buggy, but the real story is being written in your mind by what you're picking out of that and seeing it. And to your other question about, you know, the changes, we don't have a filter like Walt Disney that we had once, who managed to know what all of us wanted before we knew we wanted it and build it like Steve Jobs did also. And now some of the things are good. I think the Hatbox Ghost, I'm really proud of how that came out. There are other things I don't like. I think one of the things we really need to do with technologies that are out there today and the ability we have to convert them into dimensional things is a little bit of stepping up to that line and going in there and touching some of the sacred things. I really think it's time to do that. I'd love to see Madame Leota done today with what I know we could do in that crystal ball. Because when I was a kid, watching a movie projected on a mannequin head was very exciting. But today, you know, it's time to move on that, and I know we have things that could do that. So I think hopefully you'll all be impressed with the things that change, and that's part of life, and I think we owe it to the future kids to be just as excited about that. The worst thing could be for it to become a museum of things that were really exciting to us back in 1969. You know, the theory of it, of going into a place and getting the bejesus scared out of you, is still really valid. And so how you do that, though, is so much trickier in an audience as sophisticated as you are. You can probably go out the door today and buy a lot of the tricks that we have in the Haunted Mansion out on that floor.
That's true.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of space in there still.
Is
There's a lot of room. Well, there's a lot of surface space in there. You know, when you go up the staircase from the load area, there's opportunities to begin the mood a little bit sooner and to begin to offer some things in there. And there is a lot of physical space. There's a lot of moments, and I think in opening it, you don't necessarily want to overwhelm or put so much in there, you know, that you can't keep track of it. But this has such a repeat audience that I think, you know, it lends itself to adding more and more little surprises here and there every year. And Florida has done that. Again, kind of, you know, some things are more successful than other things, but I think that is the great thing about it. It would be to come to it every year, and there's something new in it every year that becomes a part of the collection. And then when something becomes old and not really amazing anymore, then it's time to change that out.
Don, you had something?
Well, I was just going to pile on to the idea of storytelling. There's something that happened, of course, when Disneyland opened, and there were these large kind of experiences like Frontierland or Tomorrowland or whatever. But something about New Orleans Square and Pirates and the Haunted Mansion became these bigger narratives all of a sudden. And being a kid and even going there now, you just realize the level of storytelling. And I don't know, it was certainly a team effort from a number of people, but you have people like Mark Davis and Dean Tavaleris, who designed a lot of the mansion things, who went on to be a production designer for Francis Ford Coppola. And so a lot of people from the film industry who were trained in narrative storytelling and doing art direction and production design for storytelling contributed to that whole area. And there was something about the step up of that early 60s and the work they were doing that was really profound, I think.
1962, someone told me, it might have been Buzz Price's son, David, said, "Oh yeah, that's the year Buzz said Walt bit off more than he could chew." Because he was starting up the World's Fair. He was at Disneyland. It was not only New Orleans Square, it was the Tiki Room, which was first going to be a restaurant, but now it needs really to be its own little attraction. And it was the Tree House, and it was reconfiguring part of the Jungle Cruise and tearing out the train tracks on the west side of Disneyland. There were also some other projects that were percolating out. I think that's the most interesting year, not 1959 or 55 even, but 62, when his imagination and his mind and his ambitions were going all over outside of the gates of Disneyland to other places. And this New Orleans Square was like, oh, if we're gonna move the train tracks, then we might as well build a basement in there. Put a basement in, we'll figure out what to put on it'll be New Orleans Square, but we'll figure out the details of that later. And while you're at it, dig the culvert for the haunted mansion, called the haunted house at the time. So all that was kind of done, just like, get it done, it makes sense. You know, you had the operations people saying, yeah, it makes sense.
Such a different world this day.
And you had food people, because apparently the west side of the park was, there was not enough food in Disneyland in general, and then in 1959 when they opened all that stuff and the attendance went up, they were really scarce of food. So Walt was already interested in the idea of underground utilidors and that sort of thing. So we need more food capacity, so put all that stuff down in the ground, and then we'll build a New Orleans on top of it.
There was an interesting thing following up on what Don said. In the movie Cinderella, Walt was criticized because a lot of contemporary animation at that time was going very stylistic, and it was very literal and very believable. And Walt came back with, he said, if you didn't buy into the worlds I create for Cinderella to live in, then you're not going to believe in the magic when it comes time in the story for that to happen either. And I think a lot of what happens with New Orleans Square and the better things that work at Disneyland, it's so easy for you to buy into the story because it's so well done that you're willing to take a further leap than you might if it was just something you encountered at a carnival or a traditional way. So I think that was the leap that Disneyland in general took. And I agree with you, New Orleans took it to the ultimate believability.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom.
Well, New Orleans Square was why I was hired. And the research into that was intense. We went, as we told you, to New Orleans. We bought things there to bring back. Pieces of the iron were replicated. I actually was the one that did all the colors for the original outside, interior, exteriors, and the interiors. We bought a lot of furniture which went into all of the shops, really. One person I'd like to mention, because I'm sure you've all been to the perfume shop, was an artist called Glenda Von Kessel, who was an absolutely wonderful lady, and she did all of the reverse paintings, which took, I think, about 2 years from start to finish. Please do look at that. And think when you go to Disneyland, don't just think of the rides. Okay, we'll go to the Haunted Mansion, go here. Please look at the detail. Remember that going down Main Street, I think it's eighth scale. It's not full scale, you don't realize that. Look at all the little detailing. That's what, to me, has made Disneyland part of the success today. And that's what Walt wanted. He wanted the detail. He wanted the authenticity. He didn't want you to really it to jab at you, but he wanted it to be as you walk down. But please look and realize how much thought and effort. Disneyland's not a place for children. It's a place for people like yourselves that will appreciate what all of us do.
What do you guys think about that, huh? It's amazing. All right, well, I had a blast here just celebrating Haunted Mansion. 50 years. Can you believe that? I mean, it's a 50-year-old ride. That's amazing. But yeah, hopefully, it just continues on, it continues to thrive, it continues to inspire many people out there, like the ones that are walking out the door right this instant. It's like absolute inspiration. Yeah, they're going to Disneyland right now to go out. No, but thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Once again, all the way at the end, Bob Bird, Disney legend. Disney legend Cody Baxter, former Imagineer Tom Morris, with the wood and interior designers Tania Morris. I'm Doug Barnes. She's a past podcast. Thank you guys so much for being here. We had a blast. Let's go, Miss